Hello, here we are for part two of Mexico, an independent nation. So hopefully you already watched part one. This is part two, the final part about an independent nation. So let's check it out. We have the same essential questions we had for part one. Remember, this is the questions for our overall Mexico unit. So we will continue here. In part one, at the end, I mentioned that in 1917, there's a new constitution in Mexico. There had been a long civil war. It was hard to get some of the reforms started because there had been so much death and destruction in the Civil War. 1.5 million people had died. There was a lot of infrastructure, so roads, bridges, houses, including municipal water, was destroyed. The banking system collapsed. Gradually, the Mexican people came together. The new leader consolidated political control. The new party was called the PIR, and they're going to be in control of Mexico for the next 70 years. They had school reform, more public education. They had land reform, more land to the peasants and indigenous people. And in the schools, they had a curriculum where they increased a sense of nationalism, which is national pride. So they put that into their school system so all the kids would learn that. Another thing they started doing was called import substitution industrialization, which is like a big fancy economic term. Let me try to simplify it for you. Mexico was still dependent upon foreign investment and foreign companies who ran Mexico. They still owned a lot of Mexican industry and infrastructure. So Mexico wanted to change their economy. They wanted to own more of their stuff, and they wanted less foreign interference. So they do something called import substitution industrialization, which is they put up taxes on foreign goods and to try to increase local industry. So Mexican industry could start, Mexicans could start their own businesses and factories, and they could sell stuff to the Mexican people without competition from other countries. So that's called protectionism. You put big taxes on stuff from other countries, you protect your own industries, and you let them grow and become competitive. So they started doing that. Another thing was the oil industry. At this point in Mexican history in the 1920s, they're the third largest oil producer in the world, but they're not making much money off of it because other countries own all the oil wells and the oil infrastructure, and other countries are making all the money, mostly the United States and Great Britain. So in 1930, Mexico seizes all of the oil wells and all of the oil equipment that is owned by the American companies and the British companies, and they nationalize that equipment and those oil wells. And now the Mexican national government would own them. So, of course, the British and the Americans don't like this at all. They've invested tons of money, they've lost it all. Mexico, so there's different perspectives here. Mexico thinks they're taking back what is rightfully theirs, and the foreign companies feel like they're being robbed. So that's what nationalizing is. They nationalize the oil company. Mexico then sees unbelievable growth from 1940 to 1980. The economy grows at an average about 6%. This graph shows that growth, and you don't need to pay too much attention to the numbers on here. You can see the chart. It's kind of rising, then is huge growth, and then it's kind of the same. 6% growth is more than the U.S. has had at any point in my life. So it's huge economic growth. American growth in my lifetime has been like around 3 or 4%. There are some negatives during this period. The middle class starts to feel like they're getting left out, and land reform gets abandoned. So the peasants and the indigenous people are being left out. The middle class feels like they're left out. They feel like mostly the wealthy people are benefiting from all this growth. So again, peasants had to leave their farms and go to these really, factory jobs that were long hours, low pay in the cities. And the PIR, that's the political party in charge, they also crushed any opposition. So at one point, there's a massacre in Mexico City where 400 protesters are killed by the police. This is a picture of some of the abuse that's happening there. And 2,000 protesters were arrested. And these were peaceful protesters trying to change the government. That was not tolerated. So in the 1960s, there was a little bit of a decline, like I was just mentioning. People are starting to feel like the rich are getting richer. Everybody else is stagnating. Then in the 1970s, there's more oil discovered. So there's an oil boom. Mexico starts borrowing foreign money again. By 1980, they're one of the most indebted countries in the world. So they're owing tons of money to foreign countries. And this is a problem because the foreign countries can then exert influence over your country and force you to do things you may not want to do. Or they can withdraw their money, which would collapse your economy. So in 1982, there's an oil crash. Foreign banks quit lending Mexico money. Mexico just about goes bankrupt. Skyrocketing unemployment, wages drop. Social welfare programs get cut or lose a lot of their funding. So major economic crash in the 80s. Along come some more reforms. This time, it's the International Monetary Fund. Loans Mexico a lot of money. But they say, you got to do some things for us. If we're going to loan you the money, you have to make changes to your economy that are more capitalist and less socialist. So the Mexican government had been owning the oil industry, owning a lot of factories. So it was kind of a socialist economy. When they get the bank loan from the IMF, they have to keep wages low, promote exports, and have more of a free market. For example, the number of companies under government control in Mexico in 1982 is 1,555. That's the Mexican government controlling the economy. By 1992, 10 years later, it had dropped to 217. So that's a major reform to the Mexican economy. So the PIR is getting weaker power with these reforms. They had less ways to help people when they didn't control as many businesses. They had less ways to control people and help people, so people started leaving their party. There's also this massive earthquake in Mexico City where like 20,000 people die, and the government does a horrible job responding to it. So along come new reforms again in the 1990s. That will be the subject of a new screencast, the 1990s to the present. But I want to do a quick recap. Let's compare all of this history from 1800 to 1990. How does it compare to the U.S.? Well, we had one constitution for 230 years with just one civil war. Our constitution has amendments, and so when there's change and reform, we abolished slavery. We gave women the right to vote, all in these amendments. So that's an important process of our government. Most of our leaders served 1 or 2 terms, and they left 2 terms voluntarily. It's not a law that you can only have 2 terms until 1940 or 1940s. So everybody was leaving voluntarily because of George Washington's example, that you only serve 2 terms. Thank you, G-dubs. That's what I call them. There's also a peaceful transition, so we're not having civil wars and coups and assassinations. John Adams leaves power when Thomas Jefferson takes over, and it's peaceful transitions ever since. We also have a lot of small landowners. We had a law called the Homestead Act when the Midwest and West were being settled. People were given small plots of land, 160 or 320 acres, for very low prices. And so we were encouraging small landowners on purpose. However, everything's not great. Let's not toot our own horns too much. We did have slavery, and After slavery was abolished, a lot of white Southerners continued to. There were lynchings. It was terrorizing of the black population down there. So we still had our own issues. Finally, a lot of people in Mexico might not be aware of all the stuff in this screencast, but they may know more about their soccer history. Mexico and the United States are widely considered the two powers in the conference known as CONCACAF, which is Central America, U.S., and Caribbean. Mexico leads the overall competition. So Mexico is our biggest rival in world soccer. And they're beating us overall, but we're winning since 1980. So all this political history, super important. Also important to remember your soccer history. That's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. See me in class or email me.